Hey everyone, this is Diamond Rivera, and we are back at it with the Live Discussions with Diamond podcast. This right here is episode 208. Yes, I said it, 208, and this one is definitely special indeed. But before we get started, I hope everyone is having an amazing Friday and a great start to your weekend. And today, people, this episode for me means so much because this person here, I basically grew up around as a young youth dancing at Starlight Dance Studio. His DJing skills are legendary. Again, like I said, he's seen me grow up. This man has traveled the world, has DJed at so many events throughout the world, New York and abroad. And honestly, having this opportunity to catch up with him is really a long time coming. And honestly, everyone, I'm very pleased to announce that we have here the legendary DJ Nelson Torres. Let's go. Nelson,
Diamond.
yes, Nelson, it is a pleasure. First of all, it is a pleasure to have you on this podcast today.
Awesome. Thank you for inviting me, man. I just, you're all grown up, man. Look at you.
Yeah, hey, I'm the 31. I think when you saw me years ago, I maybe was like 9 or 10, if that.
Yeah.
But for me, again, like I said, having you on this podcast means a lot to me because, again, like I said, you see me grow up, but also realizing your catalog. For me, I've also done my research and checked your website and also seen your resume and seeing how much and how many experiences you really have had. And having you on the podcast means a lot because, again, here at this podcast, we focus on shedding light on artists, creatives that really have given back to their communities, but also have paved the way for so many more artists and creatives today. So having you on is a blessing. I'm thankful. Listen, first of all, Nelson, before we get started, how have you been?
Good, man. Good. Just day to day, trying to get through this craziness. I guess we're getting back to the normal, or I hate that phrase, the new norm, right? But
Yeah.
actually, right now, I'm just enjoying. It looks like spring is back, man. 60-some degrees in New York, so I'm happy. I love the springtime. So good.
Absolutely. And I love the Keith Haring kind of tribute you got there on the shirt as
Yes.
well. That's that New York. And listen, people
Yep.
in New York, if you don't realize, it can be 4 or 5 different seasons in one day. So we don't take this beautiful weather for granted.
Yeah.
But, Nelson, for me, I've had organizers, promoters, performers, but also to what really means a lot is having the DJs. Because for me, whether it's the newer generation or the ones that have done it before for so many years, I've always said the DJs are really the lifeline of our dance community because without the music, without someone dedicated to playing 4 to 6 hours at a time at events, a lot of times we wouldn't have that essence as we did. And for me, seeing the work you've done over the years, it really is truly special because, again, not everyone can do this. Maybe a lot of people think they can do this, but me and you have talked and realized that, hey, many people think they can DJ, but it definitely takes a lot more than just having a computer and a controller. It really takes a specific skill to really pull it off.
Well, yeah, thank you for recognizing us. And I say us because, there's a lot of us out there. Um, but yeah, it's funny you should mention that because I remember when, and unfortunately, I think this is still the case a lot of times. Well, we don't have the mega clubs that we used to anymore, at least in New York.
Mhm.
But I can't tell you how many times I would go to a club and beautiful club, the bar, the dance floor, and where's the DJ booth? Oh, the DJ booth. And it's like some little closet in the corner. It's like they would forget the
Yes.
DJ. So yeah, so you taking time to recognize DJs and acknowledge that's a big deal for me at least.
Absolutely. So Nelson, really to understand, of course, you're from New York, but
Mm.
how did the DJ bug, the music bug really hit you?
Wow. I'll date myself. I'll say it started about almost 40 years ago.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So listen, I thought you were just approaching 35, man. You
Thank you.
you could have
Thank you.
fooled me.
Thank you. No, seriously. Growing up in the Bronx, New York, late 70s, early 80s, when rap, hip hop was just starting. It was a
Mhm.
big deal for me. there were the block parties,
Yeah.
and my sister would walk me down the block. Around the corner, there was a Bruno Avenue in the Bronx. They used to have block parties. There was a
Mhm.
DJ named Daryl James and his crew. They used to play. You know, they had the homemade speakers, the huge speakers they used to bring out, and they would put barricades around the DJ equipment. So one day, my sister, who's older than me, decided to be nice and take me down the block because she used to hang out with them. And I could hear, there were guys rhyming live on over his beats. And I pushed me through the crowd, got up to the front of the barricade, and I saw the DJ equipment. I saw him scratching and cutting, and I was just like, "Wow, that's what I want to do!" Like, it just something. Like, I get goosebumps still talking about it, and that was almost 40 years ago. That was it.
Wow. And
That was
it's
it.
interesting you say that because many people who don't know, I mean, again, hip hop originated in the Bronx.
Mm.
We can say New York City originated in the Bronx, but there were many elements to it. There was the DJ, there was the graffiti, there was the dancing, there was the rapping, and everything in between. And I feel, especially in the late 70s and 80s, many people will say the Sugar Hill Gang, but also people have to understand it really started in Sedgwick Avenue with DJ Kool Herc and those amazing block parties. And like you said, having that opportunity to be at those block parties back in those days and actually getting inspired at that moment, that right there is something many people can't even fathom. Because again, nowadays you see these DJs now, they got, sometimes I only see them with a computer and a controller compared to years ago when you had a whole system.
Yep. I mean,
so I'm sorry to cut you off, but I want to ask you actually, do you remember your first like DJ set?
oh yeah, and if anyone checks out my IG page, DJ Nelson Torres, I've posted photos of my first DJ set there. I think I was wearing a leather bomber, with, or yeah, actually, there's a picture with my Adidas suit. That's what it was, because, like you said, the breaking, right,
Mhm.
the DJing, those two parts were, because I used to dance also. Those two were mine. A little bit of the graffiti, I was never really good at it, but yeah, my name was on walls here and there and stuff
Oh
like
man,
that.
don't get yourself in trouble now.
But yeah, I remember my first DJ set. I had a set of, I don't know, they were mismatched turntables, and they
Mhm.
actually, I didn't have a mixer, so it was like basically two separate stereo systems and without a mixer. So when one song was finishing, I would lower the volume on that one and raise up the volume on the other, instead of having a mixer to just slide across in between.
Wow. I mean, and for many people back in those, I mean, who weren't around back in those days, in terms of just the atmosphere, in terms of the, the rise of DJs, was it more of a competitive feel to it, or was it more of a united front?
It was a little both. I mean, you had your DJ battles, right? And then you
Mhm.
had your sets, your crews. This guy's are better than that guy. Who's throwing a better party? Who has a better sound system? Who can mix
Yes,
better? Who can scratch better? I think that's all. I think it's all human nature, really. So
absolutely. So then, in question is then, you growing up at home, I'm assuming salsa music was just always playing in your household. Am I correct?
yeah. So that also inspired me because I want to say it's in my blood. Like, I've got entertainers in my family. I've got cousins who are actors. I have two older siblings that were in the parks, in the clubs. So I always heard that music. But
Mhm.
my grandfather, also, my mom tells me my grandfather was a DJ. Probably didn't use the term DJ back then, but he was the
Yeah.
one who used to pack his records on the back of his bicycle in Puerto Rico on that
Mhm.
little strap him down, and he would ride his bike to the party, and he'd be the guy playing the music at the party. So that was my grandfather. I still have a couple of his records too in storage with his stamp on them.
Wow. I mean, and listen, many people nowadays, and what I love is that events are bringing back, but specifically DJs are really bringing back the vinyl,
Mm.
those vinyl. Because for me, I always felt that the vinyl playing just had a different feel to it. It
Hmm.
just had a certain vintage feel to it. But when was that, or when was your actual first event? Do you remember what that experience was like for you?
Um, yes, I do actually. I used to DJ in my bedroom for a few years, and house parties were very popular back then. So I'm in grade school at the time. One of the older Jose Camacho. DJ Romance. He was the neighborhood DJ. He was older than me. I was always the youngest out of the crew. So we were at a house party. It was a bunch of kids from my grade school. He was already in high
Yeah.
school. He was an older brother of one of our friends.
Mhm.
So he's DJing, and I'm just standing there watching him, and you're like salivating, like, oh, I wish I was, I could DJ, blah, blah, blah. So um, comes the time of the night. So back then, the house parties, I don't know if people still do this. You had your segment where you play slow jams.
Yes.
And he wanted to dance with some girl. So he looks at me, he goes, he knew I was DJing. He goes, no, get on. He let me do a set of slow jams. I was thrilled. That was all I could talk about the rest of the night. Did you hear that way I transitioned from that one? I'm like, people are like, Nelson, you're playing slow jams. And I was like, but still, I mixed from one, I put it in just in the right amount of time. There was no gap in between. And they were like, you were playing slow jams. I was like, but still, I was DJ. I was so excited. I think I was about 12 years old, 11 or 12 years old at the time.
Wow. and most people I know who are into DJing, they kind of start around 16, 17 because also, hey, DJing was expensive. It was expensive back then like it is now. So then when was that transition for you into kind of the Latin dance scene? How did that
So into the Latin dance scene didn't happen till fast forward till the mid 90s, late 90s maybe, when again, like as we were discussing offline, doing private parties, played a mix of everything. And so I figured how I ended up at Side Street. Anyone from the Bronx knows Side Street. Your friends of mine were telling me about this party. It's so great on Sundays, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, I wasn't into going to Latin clubs. I was just like, I didn't know how to dance to music. Again, growing up Puerto Rican household, I knew some of the music. So one summer, Sunday night, I ended up there and I was just blown away. I was like, wow, look at these people dancing. The music was amazing, the live band. And that was it. So from there, I don't know how, at the private parties, I started getting more and more requests for salsa. Just coincidence. And so I started building my catalog because up until then it was, the typical, what everyone knows, the Gran Combo, anything Fania, Frankie Ruiz, the popular stuff.
Yes.
And then I just started getting calls. Oh, I heard you could play salsa. I was like, yeah, sure. And I joined a record pool that was providing me with Latin music. And before I know it, I got a call. And sure enough, one of these club owners that I knew, he found out I was doing a Latin night somewhere. Someone hired me. He goes, "Do you have enough salsa to do a night?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure, why not?" But back then it was mostly it wasn't as common to play salsa the whole night. It was salsa with merengue, some cha cha cha. But yeah, and then from there we started playing Latin nights, and it just grew from there. And I think what really put me on fast forward was David Melendez. I was doing his parties. Again, Jackie would book me for the private parties, 316s and everything. But he called me one day. He goes, "You know what? I want to start a social every Friday night with Evelyn. Oh gosh, forgive me, Evelyn. Evelyn Ramos, I believe. Because we're going to start doing Friday nights, all salsa. Do you want to do it?" I said, "Sure, why not?" That was my very first social, and that lasted from there it was just like, that was it. Social after social, which led to congresses, which led to travel. And the rest, as they say, is history.
Yeah, because it's those moments. But for people who didn't know Side Street, in the Bronx, I believe it was on Westchester Square, East Tremont on the 6th line.
Blondell Avenue, yep.
Yes, and I remember, I think that was a side street that it had the mirrors. Once you walk in, it was, you kind of knew. And then it had the bar to the side with the bathroom. Don't get me started. But, and see, in that right there, the late, great Dave Melendez, who was the originator of the New York Salsa Congress, realizing that putting you in that moment and you capitalizing on that moment evidently pushed you forward into a whole new realm and possibilities. So then going from just a social circuit, what was that like, or what was the event or kind of the festival or congress, what have you, that kind of showed you like, oh, this is a whole different world than I'm used to?
Yeah. So again, just the socials, just playing salsa all night. As much as I love the music, I was just like, people didn't understand, like, because I was still in touch with a lot of my hip hop DJs, my house music DJs, and they were like, "You're just playing salsa all night." I was like, "Yeah." Oh, and the best part was they were like, "What do you mean they don't want you to mix?" Because growing up old school DJ, you have to blend everything, right? So, and I was doing that. I was mixing, I was chopping, but I was getting pushback from a lot of the dancers. Oh, we want the song to end, and I was just like, no,
Mm.
that's not what I do. So that was an ongoing battle for a little while.
Yeah.
But when I would tell this to my other DJ friends, they were like, "But what do you mean they don't want you to mix? What DJ doesn't mix?" And I was like, "Guys, you got to come see it for yourself." But
Yeah.
to answer your question, I think it was such a long time ago. I get my timelines mixed up. But I took a trip with David Melendez to Asia.
Wow.
Yeah, I was. This was early maybe 2001.
Are we talking about
Um,
Japan?
yes, we went
Yes,
to Asia.
with
We
the
went to
oh,
Asia.
okay, okay.
So he had already been there with the Heartbreak Boys, and
Yes.
he kept talking about it. And then he says, "You know what? I'm going back next year," which was again, I think maybe 2002, 2003, something like that.
Hmm.
And at the time, I wasn't working a full-time job. I was just DJing. That was it. I had I think about 3 years. I had lost my job in 2001, my full-time job, and I was
Hmm.
just DJing. And I did that for a couple of years. And so I had, I didn't have to ask for vacation time or anything like that. He was like, "You want to go to Asia?" I said, "Let's go, book it." I do remember it was 2001 because it was October. It was right after 9/11. So
Oh
that's,
wow.
yeah, that's why I remember. So I was like, yeah, everyone was so depressed and everything. I said, man, let's just get out of here. We went to Japan. We booked the trip. We went to Japan and Hong Kong.
Mm.
And that was it. When I went to Japan, when I saw that Congress and I saw all these people on the dance floor, all these Japanese people on the dance, I was just like, whoa, what is this?
I mean, yeah,
um,
when you're literally going across the world and you're
yes.
seeing like hundreds of people, if not thousands,
Yep. Yep.
dancing to the music you're playing.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. That was
And
it.
I got to give a big shout out here to Guillermo Ayala from the original Caribbean Soul.
Ah,
And,
Guillermo.
and for me, like you said, a real deal DJ. Yes, because what's interesting is that what you said earlier was DJs who kind of transitioned into the Latin dance scene. It was really a culture shock because you come from the mixing and the blending to literally they just say you play the song once it ends, go right to the next song, and
Mm-hmm.
that can be kind of like like you said that pushback. But then realizing it's kind of the cliche saying of what the customer wants, the customer gets. But
Yeah.
going from that trip to Asia, then coming back, and what was that like for you then? Getting that experience there, coming back to the States, was it like, hey, I really kind of want to dedicate myself more into the Latin dance scene?
Yeah, it was, and remember back then. So at that time, yeah, I was already using mostly CDs. I had gone from vinyl to CD, so it was easier to travel, even though the CD cases got heavy going to the airports and stuff like that.
Yeah,
But it's still somewhat limited the DJ pool as far as DJs being available to spin. So I was getting a lot of calls because there weren't many of us that could play salsa all night
yeah.
or these events. So that helped, and yeah, it just kind of happened organically. Really, I wasn't even looking for it. I kind of stumbled into it.
Yeah. And so then going, of course, in the 2000s, like when I'm looking at your resume and I'm seeing places like Voodoo Lounge in Kansas City or Singapore Salsa Fest or Miami, Indonesia, Bermuda, the Philippines. I mean, and the list goes on. For me, what I find so fascinating is that, there was a time when there were very limited DJs. There were
Yeah.
so many, there were groups and companies blossoming slowly, but the actual having like that DJ you could count on was a rarity at one point. So, and then of course, seeing that, I believe from 2001 to 2008, you were the official DJ at the New York Salsa Congress. So, what was that experience like? Of when David was back in the days when they had the Catskills events slowly building to now actually having the New York Salsa Congress. What was that experience like?
That was awesome. That was also I was David's right hand. He would tell anybody, Nelson's my DJ. That's it. I mean,
Mhm.
he is, gosh, was um, the most loyal promoter friend that I've. Well, keep the friendship part out of it because I don't want to get emotional. But the the most loyal organizer that I ever worked for. It was just like, Nelson, you're with me. If I'm doing an event, you're in. That's it. Um, so some people may look at that as like, oh well, you're his friend, so he's going to hire you whether you're good or not. trust me, he would not have had me by his side if I wasn't good, if he didn't feel I was good enough.
Hey, he definitely was honest, even to me, because
Yes.
I have to say, for me, I have to be totally honest. David, for me, was very inspiring, but me and him clashed because I was that kid of, and many people call me Styling Diamond because I would do whatever I wanted because if I wasn't feeling it, but there was times me and David had to have conversations. But one thing I can say, he was truly honest. Because again, even as a director, he was a realist. And especially when you had teams and companies and you're dealing with children, because as you said, dealing with David, you also dealt with Starlight Dance Studio, and you were the premier DJ at Starlight and people didn't realize this, is that when you had places like Side Street, places like Starlight, other places like Dance's Dreams, and many other studios that catered to kids, if you weren't in a dance school or you weren't in sports, most of the time kids were on the street. If they didn't have that activity. So for me, I would say during those really, the 2000s, the early 2000s especially, was really unique because there was a collective of children or teenagers and young adolescents that technically were in an adult world. It was like kind of grown within it. And I got to give a special shout out to Amanda out here. Amanda Cyprian, one of the people who worked at Starlight Dance Studio, saying, David is the OG. And, for me as well, Nelson, my question to you is, of course, you being a DJ for so many years back in the 80s and then going into the 90s and 2000s, did you start noticing, and especially DJing at congresses, did you kind of see a shift or the evolution of kind of the dance scene? Like, did you really see it throughout? Did you see it grow quickly, or was it kind of like a gradual process for you?
I think it was rather quick as far as being from New York, like the on-to scene. Because like I said, I started with David, we're going to do every Friday night, or it might have been once a month or something like that. But then it became every Friday. And, for that second floor over there in that building, Side Street, it was crowded every week. And then, like I said, at the time, I was busy because, as a matter of fact, I was so busy with this. I remember being at a friend's housewarming party, and she said to a friend of hers, "Oh yeah, that's Nelson. He DJs the socials." She made it sound like I was the only DJ, but meaning, yeah, I was so busy with all the socials that were popping up, because there weren't that many again of us that could play salsa and play danceable salsa. That was the difference. Because I actually ended up with another one of the late greats, Abby Plotkin, Mambo Mama.
Yes,
I ended up doing her party because her first social, I'm not sure where she had found a DJ, but she approached me, said, "Look, the guy that I had for the first party could play salsa, but he was playing like commercial stuff. Like he didn't understand the mambo and the on-two type of salsa that the dancers liked." And so she hired me, right? So it was like that, and then I was with her for a few years also, until more and more DJs became available. Then, became a different story.
Absolutely. Yeah, and for me as well, we're talking about the late great Abby Plotkin when she had the Mambo Mama Social, and I think that was on 77th Street, down the stairs in that space, unless it was in a different venue beforehand.
Oh, God, she used a few places. One of the first places she did was, there's a church on the corner of I think it's Carmine Street down in the Village, and it was in the basement. And I remember we had an issue because it was down in the basement. And going back to what you were saying about carrying equipment, back then, my sound guy we used to use Turbo Sound as the brand, but basically the speakers weighed a couple of 100 pounds each, and an amp rack, a 300-pound amp rack, and there was no elevator. It was just the staircase, and we were standing at the top stairs, and I'm like, "How are we gonna get that stuff down there?" And I was like, "Abby, I told you, no stairs." And it was a long staircase to get down the stairs. And my sound guy was just like, "I'm not carrying that down the steps. What are you going to do?" So that was one of the first places I DJed for her. And then she found a home at a dance studio. It's all a blur to me now, really.
Yeah.
But She ended up moving to a dance studio, but I remember she liked the place at the church because it had a big stage with a red curtain, and
Hmm.
um, so for the performances and stuff like that. Instead of these days people just perform right on the dance floor. This
Yeah.
place actually had a stage, so it was a really nice vibe. But it was just that staircase. Now you can do it because I can carry two speakers on at one trip now.
Yeah,
Inside
no, I
full
mean,
of speakers.
absolutely. I mean, hey, I granted the evolution of dancing is great, but the evolution of DJ equipment is something else.
Hmm.
Because instead of carrying a 300-pound amp rack, now you're carrying probably less than 20 pounds on a speaker that's Bluetooth now. Listen,
Hey,
I mean,
at one point, I still have a small setup that I use for most of my private parties, but that small setup fit in the back of. I had a Volkswagen GTI, so it's a two-door
yeah.
hatchback. I can fit my
Ooh,
entire system in that car and still rock a party with, I'd say, up to about 200 to 300 people, anywhere from 200 to 300.
man. So, it's interesting enough, of course, your experience, but, and for me, really wanting to understand from a DJ's perspective, you coming from the earlier days till now, what has been, I mean, for you, do you feel like there's an oversaturation of DJs around now?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Anybody and everybody's a DJ these days.
And in
Anyone.
your opinion, what do you feel like is the lost art or the lost kind of missing piece in what helps someone become a successful DJ?
I think it's so easy that people don't understand the culture, um, and a lot of people don't care. Because at the end of the day, what it comes down to is your dance floor. At least for me, right? I think there's a lot of debates amongst DJs, controllers versus turntables versus this versus that. Um, uh, um, what is that? Um, there's a feature, sync. There's a sync button,
Gotcha.
right? So you don't have to mix. You know what? It doesn't matter to the dance floor as long as you're playing good music. That's a debate for the DJs, right?
Hmm.
Um, to me, so there are some DJs that I admire that are more newer DJs.
Yeah.
There's a guy that I saw. I remember. Well, he's not that new anymore because we're going back about 10 years or so. But when I heard him playing, I was like, "Oh, this guy's nice." And he was playing in a club where he had to play a variety of Latin music. He was
Yeah.
mixing. When I got to the DJ booth, he was doing everything from his laptop, and I was just like, "Wow!" I was actually impressed. I was like, "That's pretty cool."
Yeah.
Um, Not for me. It's not my thing, right? Like I prefer to have a controller. I just like the feel of actually DJing.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, so that to answer your question, it takes away, in my opinion, from actual DJing. If you want to look at it from the DJ perspective, but again, the audience, they don't care. They want to hear good music. They want to dance, and that's what it comes down to. Just keeping them happy.
Absolutely. I mean, because that's also the thing of that kind of the changing of the guard. Because when many DJs I knew back in the days, they were kind of stuck on their ways, but they realized, in order to get hired, you needed to make sure that those people really appreciated who your set. Because
Mhm.
listen, and I'm not gonna lie, I've been to events. I'm not gonna say the person's name, but I've been to an event that some DJ, he's world renowned, and when you hear his set, it's like I can't believe it because I guess I was so spoiled when I was younger, listening to people like you and many others. But also too, my biggest thing was I wanted to make sure was that the DJs were not only being appreciated by people like David, but also the community as a whole. Because what happened was it was so many more companies, so many more performers, so many more DJs, so many more events. You kind of lose that essence
Mhm.
sometimes of the genuineness and having
Mhm.
people be really united. Because listen, there's always a new DJ coming out. There's always a new performer coming out. So for you, did you feel like there was a time that you kind of slowly had to step away from the Latin dance scene and kind of going your own path?
Yes and no. So you just hit something. You just hit on something. There's always the new such and such, and I remember seeing that because, like I said, initially I was one of the very few that had the music,
Mhm.
and then with downloading music and CDs and stuff like that, people were just burning CDs, and all of a sudden they've got a collection, and all of a sudden now they can press play, and so they're doing gigs, and I think it's sure they have to be able to play good music, but it also becomes a popularity contest. At some point they
Mhm.
were having these DJ vote for DJ of the year, and the people
Yes.
winning, the people that were winning were like beating out, like you mentioned, DJs, but that became before them. That, in my opinion, okay, it's, well, I guess that's what it is. It's opinion because it's a vote. But
Mhm.
from what I see, it was just a popularity contest. I'm like, this person's been DJing for a year and a half. Can you really tell me that this
Yeah.
person's that much better? And there are some people that are naturals that have been for a short time that are awesome, but
Mhm.
I just begged to differ. And so yeah, so the point I was trying to make was that and I still see it to this day. There are DJs that all of a sudden, they play good music and people like them, and also now this one guy is the one who is getting all the socials, who's getting all the events. Like you see his name on all the flyers, and all of a sudden, a few months later, oh, but this one's the hot DJ now, and this person's now
Mhm.
getting all the events. Yeah, I find it interesting.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it comes with over time. I mean, there's certain things that we're going to gravitate towards, and certain things we're going to say, like, that's not really my cup of tea. I'm fine doing me. And
Hmm.
now, even before we get into our last segment called The Random, something I really want to pinpoint and understand from your perspective is, over the years, you still being a DJ, rather, whether it's in the Latin dance community or whether it's in your private life, especially over the years now, really you transitioning as well to private parties. What has that been like for you? Does it feel like a little bit more freedom? You kind of have a different sense of, entitlement in a sense.
Well, it's so remember, I was doing private parties before I was doing the socials and stuff like that. Like I've always
Yeah.
been a DJ for so many years, and I was doing nightclubs and like you mentioned earlier offline, DJing straight X amount of hours. Now these days, you go to a Congress now, if you're playing a 45-minute set to an hour, that's a lot because there's 15
Yeah.
DJs. I've done after hours parties where I started at midnight and played till 8 in the morning straight on
Oh my
vinyl.
God. Oh my God. Oh my God.
If I needed a break, I would have a cassette, like, or play a tape or something like
Yeah.
that, so I can go to the bathroom or something. But yeah, 8 hours, six. The norm was 6 hours. Most of the
Mm,
clubs were 10 p.m. to 4 a.m.
yeah.
If you were lucky to be doing a Latin club, then yeah, there was a band, so you got a break. Um, but yeah, to answer your question, getting back to the private parties, I like a mix of both because the private parties, you know what you're getting.
Yeah.
Um, Actually, you don't know what you're getting. I'm sorry, I meant to say the other way. You don't, because you're gonna have a mixed crowd, a lot of people.
Mm,
If it's a wedding, if it's a corporate party, your requests and everything will be coming from, because it's so many different people, right? As opposed to a congress or a social where people are going, they want to dance salsa.
yeah.
Well, although these days, well, I don't do socials anymore, but towards the end of my social days, I was getting a lot of, "Are you gonna play bachata?" And I was like, "Did you see the flyer? It does say salsa night." But I want bachata. I'm like, and now I'm seeing all these bachata festivals and everything. I'm like,
Mhm.
okay. So I'm wondering now if at these bachata festivals, people are going up and asking the DJ for salsa, if it's the other way around.
Oh no, no, trust me. I'm at these events and listen, and I'm not gonna lie, like me and you remember when salsa was king. And I say
Hmm.
was very lightly because and very respectfully because there was a point that if you heard about bachata, it was a rarity or it was the break song to let people
Hmm.
just die down. But
Hmm.
again, with our community, it evolves, and I think as well about bachata, for me, the music as well evolved on the same accord. And like you said, we go from a time when DJs were doing 4 to 6 hours, maybe even 8 hours at an event, to now you have multitude of DJs doing an hour set or 2 hour sets, and it just rotates.
Hmm.
And the thing is that, seeing like you said, doing these private parties, you've always had that experience doing it. But for me, the
Hmm.
question I have for you lastly is with you, of course, even still doing private parties and events, with in terms of the music, do you feel then that the music has evolved in terms of the salsa industry, in terms of music you can start collecting and getting? Because for me, I've seen a lot more. I've seen like people like Michael Stewart, Angel Melendez. There's different artists I've heard of over the years. But do you feel that there's been a lot more representation of newer salsa artists in the industry?
Yes, there are a lot, but they're unknown. Um,
Mm.
and as far as like the what we call salsa dura, the danceable stuff,
Yeah.
um, there are a lot. It just, I mean, I feel for them. I don't know what their sales are like, because yeah, people do it from the heart, but if you're recording an album, you want to make some money off of it.
Yeah.
But there are plenty of artists, and then fortunately, we still have some of the old school guys that are still around. Little Johnny, Pequeño Johnny, Eddie Montalvo has an awesome album that was, I think, released last year. I think it was. Thank goodness these guys are still doing it too. You know, there's music, there's salsa with swing out there, definitely.
And I mean, hey, and I definitely agree because for me, I've seen a huge transition of bachata artists just coming everywhere. But I also, as well, I've seen kind of a downsizing of salsa artists. And, for me, I feel it's unfortunate because I feel there's so much music that needs to be heard.
Yep.
But, lastly, before we get into the randoms, how has really 2020 coming into 2022 now, how has that been for you? Of course, going through COVID and now in 2022, things do seem to be getting better and events are popping up for you. Was, 2020 and now in these days, was it kind of an easy transition? Were you kind of hesitant on kind of getting back into the scene?
Yeah, I feel a little more comfortable now. Even last year, I would get calls and I was just like, I don't know if I want to be, in a room with X amount of people, sweating all over each other, and being that close. Yeah, definitely now a little more comfortable. Things are starting to open up, getting the calls here and there. Not that it's getting warmer, I'd love to do outdoor events again, so that you never know what's out there still, but being outside makes me feel just that much more comfortable.
Man, that's awesome to hear. And, I think now it helps us really transition now to our last segment called The Randoms, which is some questions that I've kind of built up over our conversation today that may deal with DJing, may deal with life and everything in between. So, Nelson, my first question for you is, what is one of your favorite records to play?
Latin music, or does it matter?
It could be any genre of music. If somebody's like, hey, if you could just play one song for me that really embodies you, what would that song be?
Well, you know what? Right off the top of my head, it's going to be a dance record. It's going to be Love Is the Message by MFSB. Sound of Philly.
Thank you. And it's so interesting because evidently Love Is the Message, and many people didn't realize this. I don't know if you didn't realize this, but Love Is the Message was a really big anthem, especially in the 90s with the voguing scene. I learned that early on when I was younger, but Love Is the Message, people don't realize there's I think a short version and then a really longer version. And listen, if you could dance 10 minutes plus to that song, I give it up to you. That's one of my favorite all-time songs. All right, next question here is, can you give me one word to describe being a DJ? What is a word that could describe being a DJ?
To describe being a DJ, awesomeness.
Hey,
I want to say inspirational.
I agree because listen, like you said years ago, when you were in that moment of watching someone DJ and you getting that bug, trust me, I believe that there have been so many DJs now that have been inspired by seeing your sets and seeing the people dancing. All right, our next question on.
If I could just add to that, it's not only that though, because it's inspiring other DJs, but it's also inspirational and for the dancers, for the crowd. I remember at Studio 54, when it was in its heyday, years later, Little Louis Vega used to play there. And from the balcony, you could look through the DJ booth and see the dance floor. So I remember seeing it pretty much from his point of view. And I could see all these people on the dance floor. And I remember thinking, wow, this guy is taking all these people on a journey. He's setting their mood. He's got them. If he wants to bring them up, bring them down with the records that he's playing. And that's what I mean by inspirational.
That's interesting you even said little Louis Vega, because I remember too, he even worked with Marc Anthony.
Yes.
Marc Anthony was coming out, and Marc Anthony was considered that newer generation of salsa that was a little bit more commercialized.
Yep, Marc Anthony. So, he recorded an album they recorded an album together. It wasn't Latin, it was dance music, and some really great tracks on there. And Mark was one of the first. So when I told you, like, I started getting more and more calls for salsa parties, people wanted stuff like that. And I just remember the first time I heard that Marc Anthony song, DJ Eddie Batiste was playing it. And I was like, I said, man, that sounds like Mark. He showed me the cover, and I was like, when did he start doing salsa? This is interesting. But the crowd was loving it, and that was great move for him, man. Look where he is now.
Absolutely. All right. Next question is: what is a favorite hobby of yours?
Favorite hobby is cycling.
Oh, okay.
I'm an avid cyclist, road bike and mountain bike.
All right. All right. Next question here is: give me a favorite memory from Side Street.
From Side Street, the club itself, or like the room with David.
Either or.
I think so. Again, this was when I was fairly new to seeing people dancing on two. From the DJ booth, watching out. I wasn't DJing at the time. I was visiting David Sala, who was one of my salsa mentors. Just seeing the dance floor and seeing the fancy moves, not so much the crazy twist a girl into a pretzel, but seeing people dancing. Seeing people dancing so elegantly, I was just like, wow, that's when I was like, what is, there's something here. What is this? What's going on here? That's one of my favorite memories of Side Street. The live bands, of course, also in that backyard.
Absolutely. All right. Next question is: give me one word to describe yourself.
Gosh, that's a difficult one. Grateful. Definitely. Hey. I try to be as much as possible.
Okay. Hey, I mean, I appreciate that, because listen, in this type of industry, there's so many people who aren't grateful and aren't humble, and I'm grateful that we have a.
And absolutely, and you know what, the industry can be cutthroat, and sure, I've been stabbed in the back plenty of times, but there's always some lesson. There's something always comes out of it. So that's the way I try to look at it.
All right, perfect. All right, this one here should be interesting. Can you give me a memory from the Copacabana?
Wow, memory from the Copa. Again, just seeing all those live bands, man. Seeing Sonora Ponceña, Gilberto. I remember this from the DJ booth. If you remember the Copa on 57, the DJ booth was behind the stage. So, I'll give you two if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
One was, and I'm not trying to brag or show off or anything, but Victor Manuel was performing one night at the Copa. So I get there, park the car, whatever. I walk around the block, and the line was down the block. Crazy. So I walk up, and since I worked there, I saw the manager. Hey, what's up? I go in, and I go right into the booth, see him perform live. And I remember one of my DJ friends, he didn't call me out. He tells me afterwards, he goes like, "Oh, I saw you walk past." And I was like, "Oh yeah, it was, it was so crowded that I just hung out in the booth all night." He was like, "Oh God, you're in the booth?" And I was like, "Yeah, why didn't you just grab me?" But seeing Victor Manuel there with all, that's that was at the time the newer generation, right? So just seeing all those quote unquote younger Latino people there for a salsa artist was so moving. Going back to the old school people now, from the booth, I remember watching Papo Luca, and this was back when you could still smoke in the clubs.
Yeah.
I remember watching Sonora Ponceña, which is one of my favorite bands. Everyone's playing. He was the only one that didn't have sheet music. He's playing his piano, no sheet music, and knows all this off the top of his head. But and I can't stand cigarettes. I don't like cigarette smoke. I certainly, but just this vision of him on the piano with a cigarette hanging out of his mouth doing a solo, I was just like, wow, that looks so cool.
Vintage, it's that vintage feel.
Yeah.
Man, see, look, I can just see the enjoyment and just that memory. And, again, the Copa, and I think just recently the Copa just came back. Yes. I don't believe it's in the same location.
It's not.
Well,
and, and to be clear, the Copa I got to play at was the one on 57th Street. It wasn't the original. It was at 60th Street on the east side before that. But the one on 57th is where I got to play. And speaking of the old school guys, because I don't even know if you're going to ask this, but I have to share this with you.
Absolutely.
Monday nights, I used to play Monday nights at El Flamingo with Henry and Izzy. Well, that was Henry's party with Izzy Rodriguez. But I was one of the, I used to play early in the night. before the band would come on. And I remember they didn't have an actual DJ booth, so we were set up on the balcony where I could see the. So Pacheco was performing that night. So Pacheco
Mm.
was in one of the booths behind me. Like they had these, like at a diner, a booth where you can sit with the table. He was there
Yeah.
resting. That was kind of like the backstage. So here I'm, I'm playing, I'm spinning, getting the crowd going, blah blah blah. And I turn around and Pacheco gestures for me to come over. So hey, what's up? What's going on? You need a drink? What's going on? He goes, I've been watching you. So what do you mean? He goes, I've been watching you play. I said, okay. He goes, I can tell you really enjoy yourself and you're going to be doing this for a really long time. And I was like,
Mm.
that was Johnny Pacheco told me that, man. I was just like, I didn't know what to say. I was like, wow, thank you. I'm really flattered. And, this man's a living legend at the time. Like,
Yeah.
who am I? I'm like, wow, that was so flattering, so moving, really.
Man, that's special. All right. Our second to last question here is, what would you say to your younger self right now?
Invest in real estate.
Hey, that is definitely a key point there because as of right now, that's what you do.
Yep.
So I
Yep.
mean, hey, I definitely agree with that one. I don't know if your younger self would take the time and study, but it's a good
Yeah.
option.
It's got nothing to do with DJing, but yeah, that's what I would tell myself. No, just what, take it one day at a time, and always forward, man. Don't there were a lot of setbacks. I let things knock me down. You
Mhm.
can't, man. You just got to keep going. You got to keep going.
Absolutely. All right. Our last question now is, you with so much valuable experience over the years, what advice would you give for aspiring DJs?
Same thing, man. Just keep going. Get yourself out there. So that's the thing. Ironically, for me, I'm a bit of an introvert. I don't like going out. Um,
Mm,
when I was really busy and playing all over the place, I would rarely go out to hang out at the clubs.
mm,
It was the opposite. Before I started DJing in the clubs, I used to go out to a lot of dance clubs. The
yeah.
Tunnel, Sound Factory. I was big into house music. Those clubs I would go to. I mean, I'd be out till all hours of the night. Um, but for the aspiring DJs, yeah, you got to be in the mix, man. It's and I know it. I'm a bit of an introvert. I can't stand being out there if I'm not working, right? To go out and
Mm,
actually just stand around and talk with people because I'm not good at starting conversations. I'm not good at making small talk, right? I'm comfortable
yeah.
here talking to you because I've known you since you were a little kid,
Yeah.
and we're talking about one of my favorite subjects, which is music and DJing.
Yeah.
But case in point, it has happened where I just happened to, all right, so you know what? I dragged myself out to a club and the promoter walks by and goes, "Oh, Nelson, how you doing? I haven't seen you in a while. Oh, wait a second. Hey, are you free on such and such a date?" I'm like, "Well," and I look, "Yeah, yeah. Oh, okay, I need a DJ." Had I not been out, I wouldn't have gotten that gig,
Yeah,
right?
I mean, everything happens for a reason because, and it's something you say really before we end on that is, I have talked to so many artists that travel the world, but when I've asked them if they're introvert or extrovert, I'm so surprised when they tell me an introvert. They tell
Yeah.
me that they would rather perform and go right back to their room than sometimes being downstairs amongst everyone else. And
Yep.
that shocked me, but that's also because it's really and a lot of them have said it's really the facade, the character that they're playing. It only lasts but so long,
Mm.
and you realize who over time you kind of realize who you are, and that's okay. And again, everybody's different. Everybody handles situations different, but like you said, there are times you put yourself out there, and that gains you opportunities. And that
Mm-hmm.
right there is, again, I appreciate you doing this last segment because I really feel it helps bring the conversation in full circle.
Mm.
And really, before we conclude, I got to give a shout out to Guillermo here saying, Nelson, keep it going, brother. Many, many of us appreciate you for always being a legit
Thank you, man.
DJ through the years. Don't get me started with the subject. Trust me. Hopefully, we run into each other soon. Awesome interview,
Thank
and I
you.
learned so much today. And
And
listen,
hello to Amanda. So I didn't mean to ignore her when she came up, but the conversation kept going. Hi, Amanda. Miss you. Haven't seen you in God years.
but really now, before as we're concluding, again, Nelson, I really appreciate that we could even have this conversation because, like I said offline, this is really full circle. From you knowing me when I was a young kid, even performing and traveling with David and Starlight, to now, as you said, and I appreciate you congratulating me on me having my future kid. That is the essence of maturity. And,
Yeah.
now having this platform, I'm not only giving back to the people that I'm seeing doing a lot of great things currently, but for me, the focus is even more stronger on dedicating my focus on appreciating those that paved the way for the people today. And having you on means so much. And, at least before we do go, I would love to know if you had any last few words and, how people can probably catch up with you and see what you're up to next.
Well, I got to thank you, of course. This is really an honor to be here. I don't normally do stuff like this. It's usually, like I said, the DJ is usually, yeah, DJ, dime a dozen, another DJ. But it's nice for you to actually acknowledge where I've come from, where I've been. I don't make a big deal of it, but it's nice that it's acknowledged by someone. And Guillermo bigging me up. Thank you, Guillermo. Yeah, and the fact that you're doing this too, like you said, we had this conversation offline. Letting people tell their side, because
yes,
if it were up to me, people wouldn't know. You mentioned my website. I haven't updated that site. I was just looking at it before we got on, so because I wanted to reference some things. And I was like, oh my god, look at these events. They're from 8 years ago.
Yeah, but even 8 years ago, but there's so many people that don't even have half the resume now that you have. So
right.
I have to give appreciation to that.
Yeah, and I got a show appreciation, like I said, if the DJs that came before me, because even though I've been doing this for close to 40 years, there are guys that paved the way before me on the Latin scene. Definitely, Henry with the traveling and stuff like that.
Yes,
he opened so many doors for the Latin scene for me. Then there were the guys that I listened to, like I said, in the Bronx on the street when I was little. Daryl James, and of course, the Africa Bambatas, Grand Wizard Theodore, all these guys that invented the scratch, Grandmaster Flash. These are the guys that I looked up to when I was a kid. House music, Larry Levan, David Morales, Little Louis Vega. I mean, there are certain guys that they're my mentors unofficially without even knowing it, because I just listened to what they did and followed them as examples.
Wow. And look, it really just comes full circle because, again, for me, my focus here is always shedding light on artists like yourselves that have done so much. And sometimes you can be soft-spoken and not want to speak, but just seeing the comfort level, seeing your enjoyment and excitement, kind of bringing back memories. This is what it's all about. And honestly, having you on today was amazing. And of course, I know you do have an IG where you kind of post your stuff. Can you probably give us that?
Yeah, DJ Nelson Torres. That's
awesome.
Simple.
So, because I know we can see some vintage stuff from you as well.
Yeah, some photos. Yeah, you were asking about my first DJ set. Yeah, there's pictures of that there. There's pictures of me with my my boom and sound system in my car. I used to annoy people. All that sort of stuff.
Man, but hey, honestly, Nelson, to have you on again means so much. I mean, me over 200 plus episodes. There's so many more people I'm going to be talking to.
It's big.
You never know who I might have on this next, but having you on was definitely amazing. I'm glad you're doing well. And, thank you again for your time. Everyone who's been able to listen to this, who will be listening to this, this has been a special episode of the Live Discussions with Diamond podcast. I am here, Diamond, with the one and only DJ Nelson Torres. And this has been a very special episode indeed. Everyone, thank you for tuning in. Have a great weekend. Stay safe, and we will see you next week.